Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Poetry Thursday, a little BookTube event where I read you a poem every Thursday and we natter on about it, or rather I do. And there's a little melodrama going on, slowly building in our own Poetry Thursday on this channel, because I am reading from one particular book, this thing, 20th Century American Poetry, a title that has also been a term of derision for me for 160 years, something like that. Actually not, actually since 1956. I have used 20th century American poetry as a shorthand for the death of a genre. So this anthology was a godsend and a challenge and has been eye-opening. This is a terrific book. But there are two problems that we're going to run into with any anthology of 20th century American poetry. One is a problem that is endemic to anthologies just in general, especially if they have more than one editor, which is that you will get weird inclusions. We've seen this a few times before looking through this book. You'll get weird inclusions. You'll get idiosyncratic choices. You'll get editors trotting their own hobby horse around the course just a bit. Because they're being paid to edit a book, it's the chance of a lifetime, you might as well. I always think that editors should resist that temptation, but none of them that I've ever seen have actually done so, whether it's a big science fiction anthology or the Norton Anthology of English Literature or the Oxford Book of English Verse in any version. None of them actually resist. Not completely. So we will occasionally hit a weird, oddball, minor poet, someone who doesn't belong in an anthology like this, even at this page count. We're doing that today. And the other problem, we are steadily encroaching on the other problem. The other problem is synonymous, in my mind, with 20th century American poetry, and that is the descent of poetry into incomprehensibility. The descent of poetry into hard solipsism that makes no sense, and the corresponding change in the critical environment, if you want to call it that, to the point where, as is true today, if you stand up and say, well, apart from anything else, I of course want my poetry to make sense, you will be sneered at by black turtleneck 21st century social media addicts who spend all their time in the reading basement of the Cantab Lounge in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You will be sneered at by them, as though the very idea that you should want a poem to be comprehensible is so podunk. It's just so provincial. You see the exact same corresponding attitude when it comes to art. You see that same attitude when you walk into, for instance, the Guggenheim, and you say, well, okay, you've got a bunch of weird, incomprehensible junk hanging up on the walls, but one of the first things I want for my art is that it be comprehensible. Once it clears that minimum bar, well, then I can go on to say whether or not I like it, whether or not it moves me, etc., whether or not the artist is any good. But it has to be that first. I have to be able to walk through a room and recognize it as art. And the same reaction. You will get the same reaction from the same people. Of, oh, you want it to be comprehensible, do you? Oh, that's nice. I was about to say, I don't know when the critical world took such a psychotic turn, but I actually do know. I do know exactly when. And when it comes to 20th century American poetry, I know the exact year that it happened. We don't run into that problem, that second problem, today. We run into the first problem today, because I'm just going through this chronologically. I don't know how many Poetry Thursdays this thing will sustain, probably a lot, probably years worth, but I'm just going through this thing chronologically. And the next poet chronologically that we get to is an inclusion who doesn't belong here. It's someone that one of the editors insisted has to be in here. Maybe because the poet is a woman, maybe because the poet has the weird distinction of having created or popularized a particular stilted, snobby kind of verse. Syncane. There's a thing called a syncane. It's strictly metrically organized. It's a weird kind of thing. There's virtually no way to do it well. And well meaning there's virtually no way to do it that is anything more than just a metrical exercise. So you look at it and think, oh, okay, so you had to do this many syllables and then this many syllables, and the syllables had to arrange themselves in such and such a way. And if you read a poem and that's what you think, it's a bad poem. Or at least a bland poem. And unfortunately, our editors thought to include Adelaide Crapsey in this anthology because she more or less invented the syncane. I guess. And also maybe because they were looking at their table of contents. This anthology, as I've mentioned a couple of times, came before the ideological capture of major publishing houses, so I'm not sure that the editors were looking at their final roster of poets and toting up boxes on the progressive stack. I'm not sure that they were doing that. I'd like to hope that they weren't. In 2023, not only are editors doing that, but they'll fire it if they're not doing it. That is the only way that anthologies are put together in 2023, is the progressive stack. No one is even interested in artistic ability. In fact, to mention artistic ability is colonial of you. But this volume, I think, was a few years before that. I'd like to hope that Adelaide Crapsey is in here mainly because of her notoriety with Sin Cane. Sin Canes are difficult to read, obviously, because they aren't meant to be read. They aren't meant to be enjoyed. They're meant as mathematical exercises. So, I guess we can read one of these, or two of them. It's a 5-line poem with some of the qualities of a Japanese tanka. The Sin Cane uses an ascending number of accents per line. 1 accent in one line, 2 accents in the next, 3 in the next, 4 in the next, then back down to 1. The final line, by pulling back to only 1 firm stress, allows for a kind of turn or moment of surprise. No, it doesn't. It's just a mathematical exercise. But and you can see it. You can see what it looks like on the page. So I guess we can just read a couple of these. They aren't long, obviously. They're from 1915, all 3 of them. One is called November Night. Listen, with faint, dry sound, like steps of passing ghosts, the leaves, frost crisp, break the trees and fall. Okay. Okay. What about the middle one, Triad, is, I think, the most famous one. The most famous thing that this totally unremarkable poet ever did. And it does show up in other anthologies. So let's do that one. These be 3 silent things: the falling snow, the hour before the dawn, the mouth of one just dead. You need lots of ellipses there to make it work. And it doesn't work really anyway, but it has a kind of a neat sentiment to it, that these be 3 silent things: the falling snow, the hour before dawn, the mouth of one just dead. It has a kind of spare elegance to it. Of course, falling snow does have a sound, and the hour before dawn does have a sound. That's when the dawn chorus of birds starts. It's one of the least quiet parts of the night. And the mouth of a person just dead? Well, okay, the mouth of a person 100 years dead is also silent. Why just? Except for the syllables. Except for it to get your numbers in. So that is Adelaide Crapsey. And as you could see when I held up the page, this indulgence in minor, forgettable poets who should not be included in a big anthology like this. If you want to mention the Sin Cane, you can. If you want to mention Adelaide Crapsey, you can, but you mention her as a note in a footnote. You don't include her work. But next is Carl Sandburg, who is big, who is a big name. You pretty much have to include him in an anthology like this. So we'll deal with that next time, but I still feel like I'm shortchanging you to give you a couple of Sin Cane from an also-ran D-rate poet. So I thought as a little adventure on Poetry Thursday, we would look elsewhere for another poem for today. And we'll look to the New Yorker. Look at this cover. Oh, man. We have the Earth in the microwave. 2022 and then 2023. And 2023 summer is not over yet. That cover is by Christopher Nyman, and it's called Recipe for Disaster. And this issue of the New Yorker had some ups and downs. Jennifer Wilson writes a long piece about the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I guess in a footnote, maybe minor, maybe technically it's a response to the new Michael Katz translation of the Brothers Karamazov, which came out in American bookstores yesterday. But it's mainly a long meditation on the book, and it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. There is a long movie review of Barbenheimer, of Barbie and Oppenheimer, but it's by Anthony Lane. And the last time I read a movie review of Anthony Lane, especially a movie review of Anthony Lane when he was reviewing a movie about a children's product, it didn't go well. He should have been fired for what he wrote in that instance. That was a long, long time ago. He should have been fired for writing porn, for slipping porn into his movie reviews because he's bored. If you're bored writing movie reviews for a venue as big as the New Yorker, then quit. Move aside for somebody who won't write porn. Instead of taking it out on your readers. But they didn't fire him, and obviously they're not going to fire him, so I'll just skip his review of Barbenheimer, which is a shame. Because I'm sort of collecting mainstream reviews of not only the two movies, but the weird cultural phenomenon of Barbenheimer, the two movies together, is the sort of thing that no movie production studio can plan. It's the sort of zeitgeist reaction that is interesting on its own. So it's a shame. I would like to have read it. But there's also a poem in here. There are two poems in here. I thought we'd read one of them to sort of flesh out our Poetry Thursday. Unfortunately, well, don't let me bury the lead. I have mentioned two things that I worry about on Poetry Thursday. One is that the anthology editors of the book that I'm reading through will include non-entities, like we saw today, someone who does not belong on the table of contents. Who knows why they're there? I'm hoping that it's because Adelaide Crapsey sort of invented or popularized the sin cane, and rather than anything else. I'm hoping that that's the case. The other problem that we will be getting to with that anthology is incomprehensibility. In 1956, and for the decades ever since then, incomprehensibility has not only been allowed in American poetry, but de rigueur. And the poets who are comprehensible have been usually sort of condescended to. It's about something? Your poem's about something? Oh, isn't that quaint? Who are you, Longfellow? I want to stress by my mockery of such terminology, which I'm sure that you have heard. If you've been an undergraduate in American college in the last 20 or 30 years, I'm sure you've heard that something like that. And I want to stress by my mockery of it that it is mockable. It is not a tenable position. It is something that snobbish a-holes say, and no one else. It is not a tenable position. It deserves mockery. It also deserves to be driven out of anthologies and out of the discipline of poetry. It's possible that the discipline of poetry, the genre of poetry, the publishing arm of poetry, could win back a few readers if it didn't hate them so much. But in this case, the other poem that I want to read you today is an example of that. It is an example of incomprehensibility being not only perfectly okay, but a job description for poetry. But it's nevertheless, ironically, paradoxically, it's by a talented poet. And also a bit of a booktube poet for me. The poet is Christian Ryman, and I would not have estimated him. I would not have gone back and revisited him were it not for booktube. Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse is a big fan of Christian Ryman. And as a result, when I learned that, the thing about booktube is that you watch people's channels. Jason doesn't make that many videos anymore, but he did for a while. And when you watch people's videos, you get a sense of, okay, is this a serious reader? Is this a sensitive reader? Is this an insightful reader? I don't need to agree with the person. But if they are a serious reader, and they like somebody that I've either not paid attention to or I've paid attention to and disliked, that's going to change things. The next time that person, that book, that author comes around, I'm going to look at it differently. How could it be otherwise? I guess it could be otherwise. If I were Harold Bloom, it could be otherwise. If my opinions were carved in stone, then it could be otherwise. But they aren't, thank God. So if that happens, I revisit. And I revisited Christian Ryman and found a lot of fantastic stuff, but not this poem. Not this poem. I want to read it to you and you see what you make of it. It has the gall. It has the absolute arrogance to be titled Ars Poetica. That would have got my goat anyway. Even if it were really, really comprehensible, that would still have got my goat. But as it is, oh my God. But anyway, that's the title of it. And this is the poem. It starts off in mid-line with a dash and a lowercase letter. It does not start off at the beginning of any kind of a sentence. A plum and othering dusk, something renunciatory in the light, until the sparrow takes the old tree's shape and the trees untreed are everywhere. If I could let go, if I could know what there is to let go, if I could chance the night's improvidence and be the being this hard mercy means. These lost and charnel thoughts, less thoughts than bits of stun, I suddenly find myself among. They are the me I am when I am not, sleeked to reason and pacific. Despair, speak to me of the pain that saves, some endmost ear to shrive the mind. Okay, so you can see that is unquestionably beautiful language choice. That is absolutely beautiful. There's virtually no line of this that doesn't have either a perfect word or a great, insightful ice pick of term, wording, or something. It starts right at the beginning with othering dusk. That is awesome. And it moves on from there. It just keeps going. It is lovely, but it is completely incomprehensible. You would have to have been standing next to Christian Wyman when he saw whatever it was he saw at dusk that gave him the idea for this poem to understand anything about it. And I'm sorry, but that is not a providential or a clodhopper demand of a poem. What did I just read? The sparrow takes the old tree's shape. What on earth does that mean? I have no idea what that means. A sparrow and a tree do not have anything like the same shape. So you obviously saw something that struck your poet's sensibilities that way. I don't know what that something was because I wasn't with you when you did it, and you have not made it clear. The trees untreed are everywhere? What does that mean? I have no idea. You're saying that it's dusk. Sparrows would be gone by dusk or going. They wouldn't be everywhere. Are they what you're talking about? I have no idea. The poem, such as it is, does not give any clues. The heart of the poem seems like the narrator of the poem is yearning for some sort of non-sleek, non-reasoned freedom, some sort of freedom that may be hinted at by the growing dusk, by the oncoming other world of the night. But that's all me. That's not in the lines that we're reading at all. That's just me wishing that this poem were doing more than itself. Now, this is numbered. Nonsensically, the two parts are numbered. And it starts in mid-sentence. So maybe this is not a whole poem. Maybe the clues that I'm looking for exist in an earlier part of Ars Poetica, although what could be earlier than number one, I don't know. If an earlier part of a larger construction, of which this is just one bit, explains this, then the New Yorker should not have run a fragment that doesn't make any sense on its own. But as it is, this is a perfect illustration of the kind of frustration that I feel with modern poetry, which is, it doesn't make any sense and it isn't supposed to. It's a members-only club. If you were there on the lawn at Yaddo or wherever when Christian Ryman saw whatever it is he saw and transformed it into this thing, then you'll understand what he's talking about, but you clearly aren't supposed to. You're clearly supposed to read the admittedly beautiful language of that verse, sit back and say, ah, yes. No. 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 I don't think that the poem is technically a sin cane, but it makes... Anyway, I thought I would bring that up because I was reading it today and it sort of neatly encapsulated that, plus the Crapsey sin canes neatly encapsulated the two things that I worry about in this anthology. Number one, will someone be included unjustly? And number two, will the poem be nonsense? Only not the good, fun kind of Ogden Nash nonsense, but rather just nonsense, where I have read that it was something, but I don't know what it was. It isn't explaining itself. It isn't comprehensible on its own terms. We didn't get that with today's poem in the anthology, but we'll be getting there. Don't you worry. Or maybe you should worry. But anyway, I'm going to wrap up a contentious Poetry Thursday, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.